So I want to go over the charts for this week when we talk about suppliers and go through a couple of main areas here. We're going to talk about just supplier management in general, the processes associated with it, which will be part of the project plan, and then also some tips and different kinds of contracts we need to be familiar with, some tips on how to run some of these suppliers a little bit better, and then finish up with some sample documents that'll just kind of give you a head start. What are we really looking for when we do supplier management? So first off, let's talk about supplier management. Supplier management, procurement management, contract management, a lot of times the same term. Okay, so we might use some of that stuff interchangeably. What it means is acquiring goods or services from an outside source. Think of it as outsourcing, right? There's some section of the project that, frankly, we may do software in our company. We don't build buildings, so we'll contract out the building part of some major project, right? That's what it's all about. As you continue, though, and one of the topics that we'll talk about a little bit is as we continue in our environment and continue to specialize within our companies, what we find is that a lot of companies will outsource or contract out particular parts of even their main domain if some subspecialty is better done by another company. So we'll see a lot of that. And so in order to do that, you've got to have some pretty good practices in place to really bring them in as part of the team and make sure they're part of your process going forward. So why outsource? This is basically the reason. You reduce both fixed and recurrent costs. If you outsource something, then you don't take on any of the long-term costs associated with it. That's important if you just need them for a short-term piece of work, right? You allow the client organization to focus on its core business. Again, if we don't do construction, why would we hire people to go do that? Just contract it out, and when they're done, they're gone. Access skills and technology that we may not have, like certain specialties. Provide some flexibility. Sometimes we just need to surge, right? Get more people. And to increase accountability. Sometimes when you add a contract onto a relationship, then it adds some accountability. What is that contract? It's a binding agreement that obligates the seller to provide products or services and obligates us to buy them. It can clarify responsibilities and sharpen focus on key deliverables. Because they're legally binding, there's more accountability for some of this work. Important to keep in mind, though, as we go through this, a contract is just that, a piece of paper. And if you're dealing with a company that maybe hasn't done a lot of contract work or hasn't done the scope of work that you're dealing with, you're still going to need to help them sometimes to come along. Just because somebody defaults on a contract, it doesn't mean that your project's going to be successful. You got to keep those two in mind. When you contract with some company, they may not be able to fulfill their end of the deal. You still have to work with them like they're a part of the team, and you have to help them to make sure that they can execute their parts of the statement of work. Number of processes that we have in place. Your book goes into all these. There's planning the purchases, planning the contracting, requesting seller responses, which we'll go into how to do that, selecting those sellers, and then once you've done all that, you administer the contract, make sure it executes correctly, and then close it out when you're done. How do you decide when to contract? There's a number of ways to do this. The 4-quadrant rule is what I tend to stick with, which is, look, if you've got something that's strategic and it's unique, we should build that in-house because that's something we want to own all the intellectual property for because it's going to be a competitive advantage for us. If something is strategic but common across the industry, like it's really important to us, but everyone else has them too, buy it. Go buy the best one that's created out there, And then if it's non-strategic and unique, like something that we kind of need in particular to us, but it's not really important, it just fills a hole, contract that out, right? Because you don't really want to spend your best resources doing something that's not really strategic for you. And if it's non-strategic and just common, office productivity software, that kind of, just buy it, So that make or buy analysis is a general technique used to determine whether an organization should make a product, invest in our people to make a product, or just go ahead and purchase it. Here's an example I put in your charts about a make or buy example. Assume you lease an item, for a certain amount of time, and it costs a certain amount, and it's going to cost a certain amount to operate it. How long will it take the purchase cost to make up basically the purchase cost if you just lease it out? And this is the solution to it. Essentially, look at it for the number of days that you're going to have it. Set them equations for both options, purchase and lease are equal. And then you kind of see how many days it would take. So if you're going to use this thing for more than 30 days, then it makes sense to just go ahead and buy it. There are different types of contracts that we're going to want to keep track of. And I've got them listed out here, and we'll kind of review them in your test too. But fixed price or lump sum contracts, this means that you have a well-defined price and a well-defined product or service. I'm going to pay you this for that product or service. Everyone's clear about what's going on. Cost reimbursable is sometimes, they do this a lot in the government where you don't really know exactly how it's going to wind up. We know what the technology needs to look like, kind of. But what that involves the seller for direct and indirect costs. So we will go ahead and pay the company because we have faith in the company's ability to execute. We will reimburse them for all their costs. Time and material is really just a hybrid of both fixed and cost reimbursable. We basically say your time is worth this, the material is worth this. We will pay you for both those things with some margin on top. Unit prices, if they're actually delivering product, right? If they're delivering a certain number of things to you, you will contract out for a particular number of units and a price per unit, depending on how many you actually buy. Within a contract, the point of total assumption is the cost at which the contractor assumes total responsibility for each additional dollar. So there is a ceiling price to each contract that says basically, here's what we're going to pay maximum, and we will monitor and work with you on the cost as we go forward in the price. If it gets beyond this, it's not our fault, right? As the contractor has to cover all the costs beyond that. So it gives you a little bit of room to work through the realities of the project while de-risking at least a little bit of your assumption of costs as you move forward. For cost reimbursable contracts, there's a number of different options you can do here too. Cost plus incentive fee means that we'll pay you for performance plus a predetermined fee and incentive bonus if you accomplish some other milestone. So say I need this by a year, but you know what? If you finish this by September, I'll give you an extra $100,000. That gives them some incentive to try to make sure they meet that accelerated deadline, right? So that's kind of what an incentive fee does. Cost plus fixed fee means we'll pay for a certain amount of performance plus a payment usually based on some percentage of estimated costs, okay? So as you're performing, if you have some more fixed fees that come in, we will pay those extra fees as long as you're executing the contract. Cost plus percentage of cost, same kind of thing. We will pay a certain percentage based on the total costs that come through. There's a lot of different risk associated with this. So if you look at how we pick which one we want to do, obviously the firm, if you look to the far right, the firm fixed price is the lowest risk for us as a buyer. We've contracted out for this cost. We know what it is. They're going to deliver. Hopefully they'll deliver. It's the highest risk, though, if you're on the bottom. For the seller, it's the highest risk because they know exactly what they've got. Now they've got to execute to that. There's no way for them to come back with us to us if the costs are higher or if they have some sort of labor problem. There's no way for them to come back and negotiate. So they have got to deliver on whatever that firm fixed price is. So you put yourself in the position of great for us, risky for them. So what's going to happen? Those firm fixed prices generally tend to be a little bit higher because they want to cover some of that risk, right, into their cost. Go all the way to the left. You got cost plus percentage of cost. That's basically them saying, I'm just going to do the work and you're going to pay me as I do it, and a little bit on top of it. That's high risk for us because we have less incentive for them. We don't really know necessarily what the costs are going to be at the end of the day. They could ramp up costs significantly on us. Very low for them because incrementally as they go, they're just getting paid as they go. And then if you look at those in the middle, it's a little bit different as you go. So you have to make a decision based on your relationship with the supplier, based on what you want to accomplish with that program, and how much risk you're able to take, what kind of a contract you want to go into. Clauses are basically different elements of the contract. Each says a different thing about how the relationship's going to go. Termination clause is a key one because it allows the buyer or supplier to end the contract based on certain things that happen. If this happens, or the supplier does this, or we go over this, or it takes too long, there's a termination clause. That's what that's for. The statement of work is going to be just like we have a WBS kind of. A description of work provided for the procurement. It's going to be used as part of the contract and will describe the work that gets done. Okay, it's like a type of scope statement. Here's an example. Now I put this in when you do a SAL or anything like that for your contract. This is what you should kind of use as a template. As a scope of work, a section on location, where it's going to be, a section on how long it's going to be, when are the deliverables going to come in, what are the going to be standards that we expect them to operate to in terms of maybe technology or in terms of coding standards or code standards if it's construction, that kind of thing. What do we accept? What's our criteria? How are we going to determine that we can't accept it? Any other special requirements? Once they sign up to this, this becomes part of what they're expected to deliver. Planning for contracting means you got to go out and do a process to actually get those contractors on. This is our supplier management plan. It has to be part of your project management plan. We develop requests for proposals, where we solicit proposals from prospective sellers, and then we'll do requests for quotes. Two different things. A proposal is generally something that you want to contract a project for. You want them to go do something for you. A quote is generally for a product. If they've got some things ready to sell, then I want a quote. This is a template for the RFP. All right, so this is how you structure the RFP when you develop it. Purpose, background, give them some information about what we're trying to do, right? Make sure they understand everything. Tell them what kind of environment we're in. Tell them what process we're going to be making the selection through. And then the statement of work that we just described. What's the schedule? What do we expect them to do? Other appendices there, related to details. What you want to do with the RFP is give everyone that you're going to submit this to an equal understanding of what is the project, what are all the details that might be useful in them making the best possible proposal. Once we get those back from companies, we do an evaluation. So it's important to have this criteria developed ahead of time so that you can put it into the RFP. So you can say in the RFP, here's how we're going to rate you. Here's how we're going to rank you against your competing proposals. It ensures some transparencies and helps you to keep focused on what the actual criteria are. If you don't say what you're going to compare them on, then they tend to come in with like all their sales stuff and their marketing and shows. We don't want that. We just want what's related to the actual project. Be very aware of proposals that look good on paper. If it looks too good to read through, it probably is. There's something they're not telling you or something they're leaving out that you're not catching. Once contract is placed, it's difficult to break that relationship. So keep that in mind. Make sure it's like picking someone to go marry. You've got to pick the right contractor here because you're stuck with them. It's very difficult to stay on track if you have to switch contractors. Okay? And it's always best to have a technical presentation or a demonstration as part of the proposal if you can. It's the first contact with your vendors. Remember, they're not going to necessarily give you your best price at the RFP time, but you want to make sure they understand enough of it to be competitive, that they need to be competitive. So after initial selection, there'll probably be a second round where you can go back with these contractors and say, give me your best and final offer. Then they'll look for ways that they can reduce their cost a little bit more. Remember, up front, they're doing a lot of bids for a lot of people, so they're keeping some risk cost in there. When they know you're serious, they'll look a little bit harder and see where they can actually build that relationship with you. Watch for hidden costs that might not be covered there. Training. How are they going to train you on it? Other non-product licenses might need to be included. Architecture requirements. Do they really match up? Are they lowering the initial costs and so they can raise the maintenance? What are they looking at long-term sort of costs down the road? Remember, these salespeople do want to understand your business, but not just because they like you. This is front end of the business strategy. Okay? They're trying to get in so that then they can start making money down the road. You have to be very clear about this and make sure you understand that they're a supplier and you're the buyer. Partners rely on each other. They always come to tell you that they want to be a partner with you. If they're selling a commodity, they're not a partner, so don't act like they are. True partner relationships mean both companies invest themselves into something. That's actually pretty rare. These are suppliers. Remember that they're there to make sales, not to provide solutions. So, don't get caught into the relationships with your suppliers to think that, they're in there with you, because they have a very specific job to do and you need to make sure they do it. When you're requesting seller responses, decide who you want to do the work, send the appropriate documentation, and obtain the bids. Organizations can advertise to procure goods in several different ways. You can just approach your preferred vendors. You can have a big broadcast announcement. You can send the RFP out, advertise to anyone who's interested. Once you get that initial bid out, a lot of times what you'll do, if it's very technical, you'll have a bidders conference or an industry day where you can invite everyone that you've sent stuff out to who's interested in this to come listen to you talk about it and then ask questions, both in private and in the group setting, so that everyone can understand what you're actually asking for a little bit better. Once you decide that, you go through an evaluation like this, where you take the technical approach, management approach, all this for each of the proposals that you get, and you score them. Once that comes out, you choose the best one, and you can award the contract. Negotiate the contract, obviously, a little bit more with them, but then you can award it. And that's the sort of how you do the contract selection itself. Once that's in place, you administer it. Remember, you avoid constructive change orders, just like we've talked about in the past. Everything has to be worked through configuration management. Change control suggestions here on this. You want to talk through this, have backup plans, use tools and techniques just like we've talked about for the rest of the term. Once you're done, you close out the contract, you determine all the work was done correctly, update records and such, and then close it out to get formal acceptance and closure. that's the list of contract management. So let's get to the rest of the class.